Tonight, you're not out on the fjord watching waves test the hulls. You're inside the house that quietly refuses to build a ship for the dead. Before you fall asleep, you'll hear why a single nail clipping matters, how a bowl by the hearth keeps its own small vigil, and how a ship called Naglfar patiently waits for whatever people forget to burn. You'll walk through a bedtime rule that sounds like superstition but works like good bookkeeping against the sea. Lamplight leans over a wooden board. A small knife taps once, then rests. Ash in the fire breathes in slow pulses as if the coals are counting. Somewhere in the rafters, a wind moves like slow oars in the dark, nudging the roof but finding no loose splinters, no careless crescents of nail. The room smells of smoke, wool, and a trace of salt that never quite reaches the door. It is very quiet work, keeping the world from ending in such a tidy way. If nights like this keep you company, you might consider subscribing. And if you share where and what time you're listening from, perhaps the next soft tap of the knife will remember you there, half awake while the house finishes its small audit of the day. Because tonight's story about the nail ship and the dead doesn't begin on the water at all. It begins where the fire is and nothing sharp is allowed to wander. You might not expect a bowl by the hearth to have much to do with world endings, and yet here we are standing in the soft breath of the fire, looking at a clay lip that keeps the sea from coming indoors. The bowl is ordinary on purpose. It pretends to be for salt, or for crumbs, or for that mysterious handful of things that appear during winter bits of wool, a splinter, an unclaimed button from nobody's sleeve. But everyone knows its real task. It is the quiet gatekeeper that catches what the night would borrow forever. The story says a ship waits in the dark, far from houses, far from sheep and smoke. It is built of what people forget to keep. It prefers the small things. It has an appetite for clippings. A single pale curl of nail, trimmed absent-mindedly and tossed aside, becomes a plank if no one is looking. It sounds unlikely, which is why it works so well as a bedtime rule. Trim inward, never outward, and place each sliver in the bowl, as though the bowl were writing a soft letter to the world saying, "Not tonight." The house makes a habit of this remembering. In the quiet after supper, someone brings the small knife that fits the thumb. It is not a war knife. It has no stories about trolls, only stories about neatness. The lamplight spends a long time inspecting the clean curve of each nail and finds in the inspection a kind of prayer disguised as hygiene. The knife moves toward the heart, never toward the door, because it is believed that outward cuts invite outward paths, and outward paths eventually become roads. And roads at night are like rivers that don't mind carrying anything thin enough to float. Each clipping lands in the bowl like a pale seed. If you listen, there is a sound, a polite tap. Tap means not a plank. Tap means no timber for Naglfar. Names make good locks. Naglfar is the nail ship. It likes patient work. It does not hammer loudly, it accrues. Somewhere beyond the ridge, where the fjord keeps its own calendar, a wind moves along the keel of a vessel that is not yet finished, and if the bowl keeps doing its job, never will be. The house's unwritten tax is simple. No nail goes to waste. Each one is burned, buried, or bound away from the tide. It helps, oddly, to imagine an accountant with seaweed in his hair, a clerk employed by the dead, scratching with a fishbone pen on floating parchment. He tallies what the careless provide. The entries are small, 2 thumb pairings from an otherwise generous man, a ring finger's gift left on a cutting stump during haying, 1 child's boastful crescent tossed after a first successful trim. The clerk does not judge, he balances. And so the family balances too. They call it the silent tax. You can forget to pay, of course, but forgetting buys timber, and timber buys hulls, and hulls buy voyages that no one requested. The house sets a mild rule because mild rules are obeyed. The bowl never scolds. The knife keeps a friendly shine. There's no drama in the trimming, only the ordinary swell of breath in and out. The proof that the sea is kept ashore is very boring. Nothing happens again and again and again. Night arrives the way it always does in the north, not by turning off the light all at once, but by dimming every object until they agree on a new shade of blue. This is when chores have their favorite voice. Floor swept inward. Threshold brushed with birch, its little twigs whispering like a soft broom choir. The bowl is checked. The small knife is warmed in a palm and set back on its shelf, edge-wrapped, because anyone who has ever lost a needle knows that you never leave small sharp things to their own map-making. Loose slivers are gathered with a bit of wool and a pinch of salt, not because salt has legal authority, but because it tastes like vows and helps small heaps behave. Everything is lifted with a cloth, not with a bare hand. A bare hand seems to the night like an invitation, and we are trying to keep the guest list short. Iron touches the bundle once, a nail head, a scissor tip, any small circle of the earth's blood to make the bundle honest. Breath sets the tempo. Inhale 4, exhale 6. Somewhere on a keel that does not quite exist, someone is counting 2 and falling behind. Small things change their nature when you supervise the change politely. Into ash, some of it goes. The fire is good at very quiet paperwork. It stamps each slip with soot and sends it upward, invisible, where even the most ambitious shipwright cannot retrieve it. Into earth, more of it goes. A shallow place by the door is where the house keeps its kinder secrets. 3 knots in a strip of linen, a stone laid over, the kind of stone that has already proved it likes staying where it is. Into smoke, the rest is invited. Not a thick smoke, the room is for sleeping, not for stinging, just the fine ghost of juniper made theatrical by lamplight. In that light, the bundle thins to nothing, and the bowl sits empty like a calendar, with a line drawn through the day. The rule is not hard. It is the sort of rule that makes boots more polite and mittens easier to find. People sometimes smile about it as though it were superstitious housekeeping, but they still empty the bowl. That is how the sea loses, night after night, by the stubbornness of small habits that do not brag. You can imagine, if it helps you drift, the ship itself, always almost ready, like a sentence that can't find its last word. The ribs of the hull are drawn from promises that broke in half instead of bending. The planks are the palest wood you have ever seen because they were never trees. They were always left behind, the color of moon cuttings. Some days the ship is said to creak on its tether, not with despair, but with the familiar impatience of a cart that would really like the path to dry. There are jokes about it. Old men say the ship has quite a manicure. Children ask if it needs a file. The humor is dry on purpose, like storm bread. The important thing is that laughter also fills the bowl a little. Laughter is heavy enough to keep small things from floating away. When a body is washed, the rule returns, even gentler, and it wears warmer clothes. Nails are trimmed short, neat, contained, untempting. This is called kindness at the edge of a road. The clippings are wrapped in linen because silk would be too proud and wool would scratch. The linen is knotted 3 times, not because 3 is mystical, which, to be fair, it usually is, but because 3 is the number the fingers do without thinking. The bundle sits with a touch of salt to cool its meaning. The knife moves toward the heart, even now. Away it invites roads. Roads invite ships. Nobody prefers that. Words are chosen that fit inside a cupped hand. Rest, go easy, keep company, remember only good fields, and the sound of a low bell at fog time. This is the last trim. The knife is cleaned and set aside. There is a quiet agreement in the room, a little like the agreement you hear after someone says grace and nobody quite wants to scrape a chair. It is not magic. It is good manners extended across a threshold, and because there is always someone who wonders, the hearth holds a clear rule about what cannot be asked. Nobody asks fire for omens. The hearth is hired for warmth, not for prophecy. Even the wise know how quickly a coal will cause a rumor. Requests, when made, must be reversible and kind fit for a market day, not for a lifetime's debt. If the house keeps a question too hot, it writes it smaller, sets it aside, and assigns it to the thin moon when the sky is feeling practical. Boundary is not spectacle. It is two good times stitched together, a start that feels like a tidy knot, an end that feels like a door remembering how to shut itself without complaint. Either way, no lingering threats. The night does not like cursive handwriting. It prefers block letters and tidy margins. No one in the corner tries to whistle for weather. Whistling is for wind and birds and people returning from fishing. The dead already have good ears. They don't need a signal. There are keepers of these boundaries who never call themselves that. The bowl is one, the small knife is another. So are the hands that carry both without turning toward the door. If you want a grand title, there is a word for these houses in saga telling, though it is not written at the front. They are places where nothing exciting happens on time. That is a compliment. The best gatekeepers practice a deliberate, enjoyable boredom. They like records. They find peace in little numbers that repeat themselves and add up to stillness. It is a well-known principle that keeps myths and kitchens tidy. If a wandering spirit cannot find the edge of a rule, it will spend the evening trying to decide what the rule is and forget to knock. At dawn, if you can call it dawn when the light is more of a suggestion, the house performs its least impressive miracle. It checks the lines on the swept floor. Ash lies flat. If wind has made a hill of it, a palm presses and the hill becomes a patient plain again. Someone notes the date, the bundle, the breath count, all the sort of details that would bore a hero and make a clerk purr. A small piece of charcoal writes each ordinary triumph where it will remind the eye later. No leaks, no laggards, no gifts to ships. There is a moment when the door is tested. The door agrees to be quiet. If the door groans, it is given a little tallow and a pep talk, as you would give a hinge that has seen many elbows. The bowl is empty. You could drink from it. Nobody does, partly because it feels like drinking from an inbox, and partly because there's usually a crumb at the bottom that has earned an honorable retirement. The house has one more habit, and likes to recite it before bed, like a prayer that forgot to rhyme. Nothing loose to the night, nothing sharp to the road. Iron rests on iron so that it does not go searching for another place to clink. The blade sleeps. The bowl returns to its corner like a small moon that has figured out constellations are social gatherings and would rather host at home. Rest is asked to go first because rest knows the way and because people follow what goes before them. Sleep cools meaning. It sands the edges so thoughts don't scratch. In longhouses and in rooms that resemble longhouses only in spirit, the same bedtime oath has been said to soft laughter. If a ship must sail, let it be short. Let it travel the length of a straw and bring back a story about nothing. The sea, listening, pretends it did not hear. Between the farm and the fjord, the night keeps some theatrics for itself. It sends a fox to write cursive on the snow. It practices leaning on the barn until the beams answer with a slow creak, a sound like a chair finally admitting it is a chair. Every now and then a breeze tries the thatch with polite fingers and gives up, satisfied that it has inspected both sides of the reed. These are not omens. They are the weather-learning table manners. Inside, someone snores with the stubborn faith of a mill grinding grain it has known for years. A child dreams about a white boat made of pencil shavings. The boat sticks to the side of a river and becomes a pencil again. The child is very proud. Scholars would call this mythopoesis. The household calls it being six. There is a practical reason old people enjoyed retelling the rule without nails, beyond the fun of watching the young make carefully inward cuts. Nails are proof that you have interacted with yourself today. They do not usually appear in poems, and so they qualify for heroism only by persistence. If they are tended, they stop being a resource for things that prefer carelessness. The saga writers, very fond of grand troubles, still let this small trouble hide under the floorboards of the world. They knew their audience. People fall asleep faster if the plot is about housekeeping, and catastrophic ships are threatened by clean cuticles. You can feel the relief of it. Somewhere God bargained for wisdom with an eye and a sigh. You are asked only to aim your knife toward your own heartbeat and say to the bull, "Keep this." Compared to a cosmic well and a bird who knows every secret, it's polite work. We could press the question and ask whether the nail ship would ever truly set sail. Skeptics would point out that ships, even supernatural ones, require joints and caulking and a fairly competent shipwright. On long winter nights, these skeptics are allowed to present diagrams, and as they do, an ant quietly trims her nails and feeds the ash. The skeptic concludes, triumphantly, that the entire story is a system for making children watch where they toss things. Everyone agrees. The children yawn at the right time, and later when the wind crosses the fjord with that particular whistle that tries to sound casual and docile, those same skeptics feel the old comfort that comes from knowing the bowl's clean and the book is balanced. Perhaps there is no accountant with seaweed hair. Perhaps there is simply a ledger that refuses to add up to danger. Sleep loves a good accounting error. I like how the rule respects laziness. It does not require a ritual that must be remembered on the 12th night of a new moon when the dogs point south. It asks for the smallest possible action, repeated so often that forgetting feels unusual. Trim inward, place the sliver in the bowl. If you are traveling, burn it or bury it or tie it in a knot and put a stone on top, the way you would with a note that says owed or paid. If you are worried that such small measures cannot possibly matter, consider how every harbor was built, one stone, then another. Consider how every tide keeps its promise, one shallow breath, then another. We believe in grand gestures because they are photogenic. The North believes in tasks that could be mistaken for fidgeting. Either way, we arrive where we meant to go, a house where the sea has not found a plank. Imagine the last sound you hear tonight is the knife setting itself down. It taps once, the way a teacher taps chalk to make a point that is mostly kindness. The ash settles into a sigh that could be mistaken for your own. The door tries its latch and accepts the decision. The bowl waits like a simple moon, faithful to a corner you could find in the dark. And far away, at the edge of maps, a ship checks its inventory and discovers once again that it runs out of wood partway through the deck, right where the cook would like to put the pot. The crew, which consists of one accountant and the concept of impatience, shrugs and schedules another delay. The horizon pretends not to mind. The sea practices small waves in case anyone is watching. And here you are, not a plank, not a dead, only a breath counting itself, 4 in, 6 out, a little longer every time, as if obeying a law written by a clay bowl that never learned to hurry. The ledger closes not with thunder, but with patience. The rule is paid, and there remains, forever and quietly, more night to keep. You might not think a small clay bowl could keep a ship from ever launching, but that is the kind of thinking the bowl enjoys correcting, politely, night after night. It sits by the hearth like a very patient librarian who has mastered the art of shushing without moving. The lamp leaves a warm ring of light around it, a halo sized for an onion, and the wooden board beside it is smooth from hands that meant only to tidy, but accidentally helped the world not end. A little knife rests there too, a knife that remembers every person who held it the careful way you hold a full cup on a moving boat. Its job is not exciting. It trims inward, never outward. It collects what could become wanderers, those pale moons of bale that, if left loose, are rumored to drift toward the sea like unclaimed debts. Each trimming falls into the bowl with a small, satisfying click that sounds enough like closure to make even the fire nod. If you're still awake later, you could follow this channel of quiet rules. The subscribe button is somewhere just past the lamplight, but there is no hurry. The bowl will keep counting whether you remember or not. This is the house law that's never posted, because posting would make it loud. The rule moves in soft routines instead. Wash, warm the hands, lift the knife by its friendly spine, and face the heart. The edge travels inward as if it were homing, as if the body were a harbor and the blade a boat coming home before curfew. No one says the anxious part aloud, which is that outward cuts make outward paths, and outward paths become roads. And roads are exactly what ships prefer to discover when they're tired of waiting on water. So we trim toward the center and feed the bowl what the sea thinks it owns. It is a tax with a very odd revenue service. Scholars would raise eyebrows. Grandmothers merely raise the lid. The clippings land like pale seeds. The fire watches like a bored notary, and a wine of numbers grows in the bowl that no one ever reads, but everyone trusts. The old names say the ship that wants these slivers is Naglfar, built plank by a patient plank from what people forget to mind. You don't have to believe in that to be careful. Belief is optional. Habit is cheaper. There are other small laws braided into the big one. The clippings are not left loose on the table because the table has drafts. They are not thrown into the yard because chickens cannot be expected to understand apocalyptic carpentry. They are not tucked in a pocket and forgotten because pockets are holes with ambitions. The bowl is the parliament where slivers lose the right to vote. Every family develops a rhythm to this. A scrape of chair, the little throat clear of someone preparing a speech they never give. The knife flash, the tap of one moon after another. Children like to guess how many it will take to sound like rain. It never does. It sounds like patience, which is the second quietest weather after snow. Somewhere, if the stories are allowed to stretch their legs, a keel listens and grumbles. A ship's favorite emotion is almost, and this one has felt almost for so long it has made a profession of it. It would send a letter, but the seawater keeps licking off the ink. The house performs the old arithmetic after supper, when night collects itself beyond the rafters and pretends the wind is only passing by. Floor sweep inward, always inward, like reminding your thoughts to return from the day's errands. The threshold is brushed with birch, a switch that makes a crisp, whispering sound like tidy gossip. Loose strands, the comb's shy harvest, are lifted by a dry cloth and never by a bare palm, because a hand looks to spirits like an open door. The bundle that will leave the house later is salted lightly, as if it were soup, and the recipe called for one small pinch of vows. Iron touches it once, a nail or scissors, to make the promise heavy enough to resist a breeze. Breath becomes a metronome. Inhale 4, exhale 6, the math of falling slowly. The mind matches the count without noticing. The knife warms to a hand, and the hand to technique. Even the cat, who disapproves of most bureaucracy, accepts that this is necessary filing. When the bowl is readied, small things change their nature with ridiculous ease. Into ash, part of the heap goes, and the fire acts like a very modest judge stamping papers. Approved, approved, approved. Into earth, some becomes a quiet parcel beneath a flat stone near the steps tied with 3 knots. Not because 3 is magical, although it behaves as if it is, but because the fingers know it perfectly and need not think. Into smoke, a few flakes go, carried by a spoon of ember and a sprig of juniper that smells like a good memory of winter. The bundle thins until there is no bundle at all. The lamp seems to lean in and nod, which is either an illusion or a form of sympathy. And when their nature has shifted ash, earth, smoke, no distant keel can claim them. Wood needs wood. It cannot mail air to fog. This is a disappointment for Naglfarish accountants and a relief for everyone else. You can picture Naglfar if it helps your yawn grow heavier. A ship of paleness, planks like skimmed milk, ribs like thin winter driftwood, forever missing exactly as much as it needs to launch. It lives where it almost becomes a kind of furniture. People joke that it has immaculate cuticles. They call it the only boat that carries a filing cabinet but no oars. Someone always wonders who decided nail pairings count as timber, and someone else says, a person who liked tidy hands and tidy myths, dry humor is part of the binding. Laughter is a dock line that keeps the idea from knocking against the hull of fear. Besides, the house has neighbors, and neighbors have eyes. If the bull were ever neglected, there would be comments, and nothing deters cosmic ships like faintly judgmental small talk. When a body is washed for burial, the rule becomes gentle enough to carry. Nails are trimmed short, contained, untempting. The cuttings are folded into linen, knotted thrice, cooled with a dusting of salt so that the moment will not fever. The knife keeps its promise and moves toward the heart as if to check whether the road inward still exists. If the road outward tried to open, the room would frown and the air would grow cautious. Words are kept small and friendly. Thanks, rest, keep easy company. Grand oaths feel theatrical, and the dead prefer mannerliness. These moments are less about doors sealed against monsters, and more about offering no loose threads to the night. The aim is to be boring in the most comforting way, like a ledger balanced to the last coin or a pantry where everything fits its jar. There is also a limit the house will not cross. No one asks the fire for omens, for example. It's been burned before literally and metaphorically, and it has decided to be only what it is, warmth with a memory. Questions are kept modest and reversible. Please let tomorrow's weather be sensible. Please let the goat not climb the roof again. Please let the broom remember its duties. If a wish feels heavy, it is written smaller and set aside until the moon is thin and the night has room for carrying. Boundaries here are not defensive walls. They are tidy edges on a tablecloth, the difference between a feast and a mess. Start time, end time, closure, no lingering threads. A spirit trying to demand a loophole will trip on the hem and be forced to sit down. This is not unkindness. It is housekeeping extended to metaphysics. Gatekeepers are never glamorous. The bull does not dream of promotion. The little knife doesn't want to be a sword when it grows up. Even the hands that practice this craft do not call themselves priests or keepers. Although if titles were handed out for stamina, they'd have drawers of them. Their devotion is to repetition. Repetition is how water remembers it as a wave and not a panic. A tidy chore returns the soul to its shelf. There's an old joke, whispered at the spinning bench. If the world is spun from anything, it was probably a long line of habits. People laugh quietly, then loop another thread. It is amazing how much myth can be kept at bay by the homely persistence of everyday exactness. Morning is the least dramatic part of this story, which is why it matters. At first light, that I sin tea quite light, more of a permission. The sweep lines are checked and found to be straight, or straight enough that the day will not wobble. The bowl is empty. You could eat porridge from it, though we don't, because porridge is for bowls that never worked overnight. A small note is made in the ash or on a scrap of board. The date, account, the breath numbers, the quirky fact that the wind tried the door once and was told to come back with better manners. You would think such records would bore the night, and they do, which is perfect. Boredom is the night's version of peace. If wind has built a little ridge in the ash, a hand presses it flat again, smoothing as though petting a shy animal. The door is tested and agrees to be quiet. The hinges receive a whisper of fat and pronounce themselves content. Somewhere beyond the headland, a ship with more ledger than hull postpones its debut. There is a small oath at bedtime, unremarkable enough to survive centuries. Nothing loose to the night, nothing sharp to the road. Iron rests on iron, so it does not say partners. The blade sleeps in its linen sleeve. The bowl returns to its corner like a moon that prefers domestic astronomy. Rest is invited to go first because people like to follow a leader with good posture. Sleep files off the corners of meaning. It rounds each worry until it rolls gently toward morning. A taut thought slackens, a busy thought dozes, and the mind is left with that pleasant sense that it is a tidy apron hanging on a peg. Somewhere far off, if there is such a place, a keel checks its inventory and finds only commas where there ought to be nails. The crew takes early lunch. The sea practices patience, which is the waves' version of sitting up straight. Chores, like stories, need small hooks to hold them on the wall of memory. So people collect tiny facts. Juniper smoke makes fewer arguments than pine. 3 knots look good on linen. 4 looks as if the knot wanted attention. Birch brooms sing better than willow when dust is light. The knife should have a spine you can trust with your fingertip. If it feels like gossip, it is too thin. Sweep inward not just for mythic reasons, but because it makes the entryway look as if the house likes you. These are not laws, just friendships with objects. If you anthropomorphize a broom long enough, it will start keeping its own promises. This is a domestic theology. The gods probably approve, and the way busy bosses approve of employees they never have to think about. Sometimes a guest, hearing the story for the first time, asks whether the nail ship is really a threat. The answer depends on who is grandmothering the reply. Some say yes, because they have found that a cautious yes keeps the young neat. Some say no, because they believe the sea has enough to do without shopping for secondhand carpentry. Most say something like, it would be a pity to test it. This is the North's favorite verdict. It is how you end an argument without turning it off, like lowering a lid on a pot to let it think. Meanwhile, the bowl fills, empties, fills. The knife trims and rests. The door tests and agrees. Even doubt is folded into linen and cooled with salt. There are days when a person becomes sentimental and treats the bowl like a family member. They call it good worker, good guard, good dog, good moon. They pat the rim and pretend it purrs. They claim the bowl prefers to catch nail crescents from the left hand first. Whether that is statistically true is not the point. Familiarity oils the hinge of custom. If love is too crowded a word for a clay dish, affection will do. Affection makes chores feel less like instructions and more like hospitality. Welcome back, little rule. You know where we keep the broom. Come in, old superstition. Have a seat by the quiet we saved for you. Be useful and don't take up too much space. Evening returns as it always does, by shading every surface the way a careful painter lowers a brush. The wind becomes a slow teacher in the rafters, explaining why beams creak the way old friends laugh. The bowl yawns its empty yawn. The knife settles with a practiced sigh of tools that understand retirement is temporary. In the fields, the sheep mistake distance for philosophy and stare into the not quite dark as if it were making a good point. None of this is an omen. It is just the world, very pleased with how flat it has managed to keep itself today. And because the world kept itself flat, the sea cannot pile up anything useful. A plank made of carelessness fails inspection. A board donated by neglect fails to arrive. In the slow race between precision and impatience, patience wins because it has better shoes. If you need one more image to tuck under your pillow, take this. A ledger floating in water, pages wrinkled, columns smudged, a neat hand still attempting to add pale numerals that refuse to stay in their lanes. Each time the accountant dips a quill, a wave edits the sum back down to 0. It is not a tragedy. It is bookkeeping conducted by tide. After a while, even numbers get sleepy and curl like trim nails in the margins. The clerk yawns. The ship, exasperated, practices postponement, which it has stitched into an art. The sea, unable to help itself, continues making shushing sounds against the shore, as if it were trying to teach the land how to pronounce silence correctly. And here we are again, where the bowl always wanted us, at the soft border between one day and the next. with nothing loose, nothing sharp, and the knife tapping once like a friendly knock from a neighbor who doesn't need anything. The rule sits down with us. It doesn't ask for an oath. It asks for habit. Trim toward your own center. Place what's cut where the fire, the earth, or the smoke will make it uninteresting. Keep the door's hinge proud of its quiet job. Let breath count itself. 4 in, 6 out, a little longer each time as the rafters memorize your rhythm. If you happen to be awake long enough to press a button and follow, that is pleasant. If not, the bowl keeps the minutes for you. In another room of the night, the ship checks again, sighs again, pauses again. The sea continues its years-long tutorial in hush, and the house, very boring and very brave, drowses where the lamp was, easing the world toward morning by doing nearly nothing exactly right. You might not expect a bowl the size of a winter apple to keep a ship from ever leaving shore, but every night a little clay mouth beside a hearth performs that very quiet miracle. It sits where lamplight puddles and ash remembers warmth, and its job is almost nothing: catch the tiny moons of nail that would rather wander. A wooden board lives beside it, smooth from 1,000 evenings of being the stage for a very modest drama, and a small knife naps there like a house pet that knows exactly 2 tricks and is satisfied. The blade has one soft rule: trim inward, always toward the heart, never toward the door. Outward shavings, so the old women say, become roads for things that prefer not to knock. Inward shavings stay domestic like thoughts that decide to put on slippers. Each pale crescent drops with the lightest click, the sound you hear when a ledger agrees with itself. If you're still awake a few minutes from now, you can promise to come back for the next bowl. Count people call that subscribing in our age of lamps with wires. But if you do drift off, the bowl will keep the tally without sulking. The house rule is never written because ink would look bossy. It flows like the nightly washing. Hands warmed at the fire. The knife picked up by its spine the way you lift a sleeping child's wrist to tuck the blanket. A breath counted to 4 on the way in and 6 on the way out, because numbers with a slope make the mind slide down them. And then the small ceremony, a crescent shave toward the palm. Another, one more to show the bowl you care about the details. No one says the anxious part out loud, that outward slivers are rumors with good shoes, that a wandering moon might find its cousin on a path and go gossiping to the sea, but the silence around the task is thick with common sense. Somewhere far off, in the region where the sea stores its half-finished decisions, a ship built of forgetfulness listens and counts how close it is to being spruce. The name people give it is Naglfar. A literal-minded translation would make it the nail ship, but it behaves more like an invoice. Every sliver unpaid becomes a plank promised. The most economical way to avoid construction, therefore, is to feed the bowl until the sea's carpenter loses patience. A few house facts grow from the rule the way moss grows on a north wall. Clippings never lie on the table because tables have drafts. A flake could skate off on a cough. They do not go in the yard because chickens treat everything as seed, and it's embarrassing to explain to a chicken why you are preventing a nautical event. Pockets are not trusted. Pockets are holes that pretend to be loyal. The bowl is the only parliament where these pale citizens lose their passports. Children like to estimate how many clicks make a drizzle. They are always wrong and always comforted. The lamp seems to nod, though it is only oil learning to be brave. Out in the not quite dark, wind moves like a librarian who has practiced walking quietly and is proud of it. Inside, the board gets a faint new scratch from a ring someone forgot to remove, and the scratch joins the history of small mistakes that kept everyone safe. Night has chores, and the house is faithful to them the way a boat is faithful to knots. The sweep begins at the walls and moves inward as if the floor were a field and dust were skittish sheep. The threshold is brushed with birch, which sings a clean whisper like new linen. Comb fall and the little drifts of hair caught behind chairs are teased onto a dry cloth. Never handle them with bare palms, the old joke says, unless you want the guest who can smell open doors to arrive and complain about the tea. A sting of salt joins the bundle to make it honest. Iron taps it once scissors nail a key to give the promise a touch of gravity. The breath keeps counting on its own now, 4 in, 6 out. The numbers run like a pair of sleepy rails. If you tip your head, you can hear the metronome of it, the little locomotive of quiet hauling the evening into a gentle tunnel. And then the small, transformative errands. Into ash, a portion shaken into the stove where embers approve with tiny nods. Into earth, a swallow of flakes buried under a flat stone near the step, the way you hide cookie crumbs from tidiness itself. 3 knots in the string that ties the cloth closed, not because 3 is sorcery, but because the hand knows it well and won't fumble. Into smoke, a pinch carried briefly on a spoon of coal with a sprig of juniper for fragrance. So a whisper of what could have been wood becomes a scent that might persuade the night to be polite. When their nature has shifted ash, earth, smoke, they are lost to shipwright arithmetic. You cannot caulk a hull with calculation alone. Somewhere, a half-built keel sulks and practices patience, which for ships is the art of remaining exactly where they are while believing they are going somewhere soon. People tease the myth just enough to keep it from hardening. They say Naglfar has the cleanest cuticles of any vessel ever planned. They say its carpenter uses a file more than a hammer. They say it keeps a tidy ledger of would-be plinks, each line written in saltwater ink that blurs as soon as the tide thinks about it. This is dry humor used as ritual oil. Jokes keep horror from sticking to the equipment. A laugh hung on the doorknob makes the doorknob less interesting to wandering dread. Meanwhile, the bowl continues its ordinary work, modest as a shoelace. The quiet grows thick and wool-lined. Even the rafters ease into a long breath, the way beams do when they remember they were once trees. When a member of the household has finished their long journey and is washed for burial, the rule becomes tender and exact. Nails are trimmed short, untempting, the way you'd fold the corner of a letter so it cannot snag passing hands. The shavings are wrapped in linen and knotted thrice with a sailor's indifference to flourish. A little salt cools the meaning. Salt has been keeping meanings from running fevers for a very long time. The knife moves inward once more, not because it expects a wandering road to open, but because consistency is a kind of mercy. Words remain small. Thank you. Rest well. Keep easy company, no bargains. The quiet at such moments is not solemn. It is practical, the way a workshop falls hush when screws are about to be aligned. If anyone speaks grand stories about nail ships or endings, the wind at the porch does the shushing for you. There is a boundary the house chooses, not a barricade exactly, more like a neat hem on the night. No one asks the fire for omens. The fire is relieved to be merely warm. If a question must be made, it is reversible and kind. Let the goat keep all 4 feet on the ground tomorrow. Let the door be slow to remember creaks. Wishes too ambitious are written smaller and put away until the moon has dyed it down to a sliver. Boundary is not spectacle here. It is start time, end time, closure. No lingering threads to snag in the dark. The lamp is extinguished like a sentence that ends with a friendly period instead of a dramatic dash. If you listen carefully, you can hear a hinge decide with public dignity to be quiet. Morning is its own tiny office. At first light, not full, just the kind that comes in like an apology, the sweep lines are checked and found to point inward like all well-behaved arrows. The bowl is empty and very pleased about it. It pretends to be capable of porridge while knowing it is purely ceremonial. A brief record is made, the date, the count, a note about the wind trying the latch once and being refused by manners. Short records resist large fear. If ash has heaved into a ridge, the poem flattens it in a slow, smoothing pass that calms the day before the day has reasons. The door is tested and gives a compact little nod. In the distance, the sea clears its throat with a sound that once frightened the young and now makes them think about soup. There's a bedtime oath too ordinary to be famous and therefore perfect. Nothing loose to the night, nothing sharp to the road. Iron rests on iron. The blade is guided home like a duck settling into a pond-shaped memory. The bowl returns to its place, a domestic moon waxing patiently toward usefulness. Rest is asked to go first because it has the best map. Sleep cools meaning and keeps hands gentle. A tidy house is a sedative you don't have to swallow. Somewhere in the paperwork department of the sea, a clerk opens a ledger, sighs, and writes 0 because the numbers have washed themselves again. In the margin, a damp fingerprint curls into the shape of a nail clipping as if to remind everyone what business we are not conducting today. To keep the rhythm lovable, people gather sleepy trivia on purpose. Juniper smoke apologizes faster than pine. Birch brims wear out politely. Willow brims talk back. 3 knots mean business. 4 mean the knot has ambitions you cannot afford to sponsor. A knife with a matte spine is kinder to your fingertip than one with the attitude of a fish. Sweep inward not only because of myth, but because dirt that exits through the door remembers the way in. These are not commandments. They are friendships with objects. If you greet the broom like a colleague every evening, it will start keeping hours without being asked. The gods, who have many important catastrophes to supervise, may glance down, see how tidy you are, and decide to delegate miracles elsewhere. Guests, hearing the story fresh, tend to squint toward the sea and ask whether the ship is real. The traditional response is a shrug careful enough to be a right. Perhaps people say, and perhaps not. Either way, the bowl keeps good books. Either way, the adhesive planks are easier to misplace when you burn, bury, and bind. The shrug protects everyone from needing to test the hypothesis. It has been in service for generations, a padded answer that lets sleep climb over it without bruising a knee. If someone insists on drama, the house answers with lint brushed from a sleeve and the suggestion that tea helps. Evenings the rule returns like a small boat that knows the harbor by scent. The wind practices its long vowels through the rafters. The cat performs an inspection of the warmest squares. The spoon that will carry embers auditions in the ash. The knife looks less like a tool than like a habit shaped into metal. Its owner's hands have learned to move at the speed of reassurance. There's nothing to sell here, nothing to prove, nothing to defeat. The only opponent is forgetfulness, and forgetfulness loses to repetition the way a tide loses to a rock you feel with your foot before you see. If you find yourself becoming fond of the bowl the way you might be fond of a quiet neighbor who always puts the lid on the sugar, that fondness is part of the magic. Magic in this house is manners extended to the possible. For those who like an image to carry into sleep, try this. A keel as pale as fingernails left on a windowsill, floating in a bay of perhaps. It is surrounded by polite waves that spend all evening explaining why they are not currently boarding. A clerk of the sea sits on the shingle and writes inventory on a piece of driftwood that keeps turning into water. Each line fades from almost to not yet before the ink dries. The clerk is not distressed. They have brought a sandwich. Postponement is their craft. After so many generations of bowls, they have learned to enjoy being delayed by neatness. They will be here tomorrow, and the day after, a little crust of bread stuck to their lip like a ceremonial seal. And so the night returns to its soft arithmetic. 4 in, 6 out. The knife taps once in the kitchen as if to take attendance. The board remembers hands. The bowl lifts its tiny room of light. We trim toward the center and make the loose things uninteresting to the roads. We give ash what it understands, earth what it keeps, smoke what it can make go thin. We sign off the evening with a very short oath and a very long yawn. If you're still with me and your eyes are not half closed like doors learning to be gentle, you can promise to come back for tomorrow's count. If you're already elsewhere, the bowl will hold your place in the queue. Far out beyond the dark headland, something built from neglect counts its boards and finds itself a board short as usual, then 2 short, then 3, like a dream that decides to be less detailed. The sea practices saying hush until it sounds like wind traveling through wool. The house, bored in the most heroic way, keeps the world on its peg. You might not expect a nail paring to have a travel history, but in quiet houses along old coasts, the tiny pale moons plan journeys if nobody minds them, and a little clay bowl by the hearth is hired to mind them very closely. It sits in lamplight like a small planet, warm at one side, cool at the other, and remembers every hand that has hovered above it. Beside the bowl, a wooden board rests, polished smooth by evenings that look very much alike on purpose, and on that board lies a small knife that always knows where home is. The rule that the elders teach is not printed anywhere, because paper would make it sound louder than it is, trim inward, always toward the palm, never toward the door. Outward shavings, they say with a shrug that doubles as a smile, are roads for things that prefer not to knock. Inward shavings are domestic by nature, the stay-at-home cousins of the adventurous flakes that try to sneak onto thresholds. Each click into the bowl is the softest possible receipt. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you can leave a quiet promise to return to this bowl and its accounts. Some people call that subscribing these days, but if you drift off, the bowl is very good with records and will hold your place without judgment. The house learns the rhythm and wears it like a habit that fits. Hands warm at the fire. The knife is picked up by its spine, the way you hold a sleepy kitten, supportive but unexcited. Breath walks up 4 steps and down 6 because slopes lower the heart's curiosity. And then the small evening ceremony begins. The blade turns inward, shaving a crescent that lands with a sound like a polite spoon. A second crescent follows, then a third, not because it is sacred, merely because the hand remembers 3s better than 4s. No one mentions the anxious rumor that outward slivers are drafted as planks by a ship that exists mostly as an invoice. It has a name older than salt stains, Naglfar. People who like literal labels call it the nail ship. People who prefer to keep the world comfortable conjured a good reason to clean up after yourself. The quiet agreement is this: neglect is currency. Every uncollected sliver is a plank promise to somebody else's plan. And so the house keeps its accounts, and the sea, which enjoys a well-kept book, is forced into patience. A few rules grow from the main rule, the way moss grows from the north side of a stone. Clippings never ride on a sleeve because sleeves tour the whole house and tell stories to chairs. They are not hidden under rugs because rugs are migratory in small ways and cough at the wrong moment. Children do not get to play fortune-telling with them, though children often predict numbers out loud and then nod wisely at whatever the bowl produces. The lamp nods too, though that is just the flame thinking tall thoughts. Somewhere far off in the bureaucracy where the sea stores maybes, a clerk assigned to mythical halls lifts a damp page, sniffs it like a dog considering a wake, and finds nothing new to report. This clerk is rarely surprised, which is their best quality. The chores that follow are as gentle as a broom that likes being a broom. The sweep begins at the walls. Dust is invited inward as if the floor were a field and silence were a sheet pen. The threshold is brushed with birch so that its breath will not sound like a suggestion. Comb fall, stray hair, and the soft crumbs of wool that escape stockings are lifted with a dry cloth, not a bare palm. A pinch of salt joins the bundle to convince it there's a contract involved, and a piece of iron taps the cloth once scissors. A little nail the back of a key, so some remembered weight will keep the promise from floating. Meanwhile, the breath counts for itself, in for 4, out for 6, a seesaw that declines to hurry. With every pass, the house becomes more certain it will sleep as itself, and not as somebody else's beginning. When the bundle is made, its nature is changed in small, practical ways that require no drumroll. Into ash, the bowl tips a quiet mouthful into the stove, and embers greet it with the dignified nod of elders recognizing a cousin. Into earth, the rest is tucked into a shallow grave under a flat stone near the step, 3 knots sealing the cloth because the fingers learned that years ago and see no reason to improve. Into smoke, a spoon of embers carries a breath of juniper, so the night has something pleasant to hold while it declines to borrow. Once ash, once earth, once smoke, the bits are uninteresting to shipwright mathematics. They decline to add up. Far out on the black water, a possible keel loses count, recovers, and loses count again, the way you do when you are sleepy and pretending you are not. People keep jokes around the rule like wool around a jar for padding. They say Naglfar, when completed, will have the cleanest manicure any ship has ever flaunted. They say its carpenter files more than he hammers. They say its sails will be woven from all the sighs people swallow rather than argue at bedtime, which means the wind will be cooperative and brief. The jokes are not for arguing with myths. They're for keeping the knives friendly. Humor oils the hinges on the door the knight prefers not to test. When someone's long day of days is done and the body is washed, the rule becomes tender and exact, and all the hands that know it move at the speed of kindness. Nails are trimmed short and contained. Nothing tempting, nothing that could snag on the world. The clippings are wrapped in linen, knotted thrice with thrift rather than magic, and a little salt is set among them to cool the meaning. The knife goes inward again, not because the road is expected, but because consistency has the calming voice of an older sibling. Words stay small, thanks, rest, go easy. Nobody bargains with sleep, because sleep negotiates only with gravity. If somebody tries to tell a great tale about the nail ship at this moment, the door puts a cool forehead against its frame, and the tale remembers an errand elsewhere. The house keeps boundaries the way a good seam keeps a skirt honest. No omens are asked of the fire. The fire has done enough for one day. A question, if it must exist, is reversible and kind, fit for a single market day, not a lifetime's debt. Let the goat keep all 4 feet under it. Let the weather remember inland. Wishes too grand are written smaller and saved for a slimmer moon. Start time, end time, closure no lingering threads that could ravel into a path. The lamp is pinched into a round period rather than a dramatic dash. The night reads the punctuation and understands the tone. Somewhere, wind rehearses the sound of hush in different dialects of the eaves and settles on the version that suits a sleeping roof. Morning has an office drawer where the little audit lives. At first light, quiet as a letter that arrives by hand, sweep lines are checked. They all point inward, which always looks like good manners from the broom. The bowl is empty and satisfied. It pretends briefly to be available for porridge, then returns to meditation. A short note is made in a book with many neat dates and very few adjectives. Count. Weather, a remark about the door resisting curiosity. Short records are strong in a way fat records never are. The heavier a book becomes, the more it complains about getting out of bed. If ash has made itself into a ridge, a palm smooths it softly and makes the morning flat again, like ironing just one square of the day. The door is tested and nods once in a way that says, I remember my role. The sea sniffs the air and decides to practice patience over soup. Evenings arrive as they always do, wearing the same coat in different light. The knife returns to its board, iron rests on iron. The bowl settles in its glow like a slow clock nobody is timing. The breath resumes its 4 and 6 walk. A modest oath seals the night. Nothing loose to the night, nothing sharp to the road. It is the sort of oath that never got engraved on stone because it has no appetite for applause. Its power lives in repetition, in becoming so ordinary that even forgetfulness starts helping. Because humans like trivia at bedtime, and trivial things often wear the best slippers, a few details travel from house to house with a rule. Juniper asks forgiveness faster than pine. Birch brooms retire politely while willow brooms send letters for several years after leaving. 3 knots are decisive while 4 knots have hobbies. A knife with a matte spine makes a kinder companion for your guiding finger than one that gleams like a promise. Sweep inward not for fear alone, but because dirt that leaves by the door remembers where return lives. These are not commandments. They're friendships with objects. When you greet the broom as a colleague, it begins to have colleagues' pride. Visitors sometimes ask whether the ship is real. The correct answer is a slow shrug with a cup of something warm in it. Perhaps yes, perhaps no. Perhaps it prefers the idea of existing to the work. Either way, the bowl does its faithful adding, and either way, the wood that might have been never quite is. The shrug saves everyone from an experiment best left unattempted. It's the sort of shrug that has seen weather and recommended soup. For the sake of people who like a picture to sail into sleep, imagine a bay where maps go to become handwriting again. A pale keel almost remembers itself in moonlight, then forgets again as the water makes small administrative sounds. A clerk of the sea sits on the shingle with a stick and a damp ledger, writing nearly and not yet in equal measure. Each word blurs backward into the tide. The clerk does not mind. They have a sandwich and very polite seagulls. The house goes on being a house, which is to say it repeats itself with competence. The board carries its tiny scratches like a curriculum vitae. The bowl has a memory for footsteps. It knows who steps heavy because they are tall, and who steps heavy because they like the feeling. The knife remembers every hand, and every hand remembers why the blade is guided inward. Children grow up and still trim as if their parents were watching. Parents grow old and trim as if their younger selves were still practicing. No one is required to believe in a ship. Everyone is invited to believe in a bowl. Faith at this scale is restful. Sometimes on a wet evening, at once to be dramatic, the wind will lift a loose shingle and make a noise that used to sound like hoofbeats in the sagas but now registers as a mistake in roofing. Someone will look at the door, which will look back with calm wood, and the two will agree to discuss it in the morning. The bowl, who knows a lot about schedules, declines to be impressed. Off in the paperwork wing of the sea, the patient clerk sketches a plank in the margin, then rubs it out with a thumbprint shaped suspiciously like a half-moon. There is no ending to this the way people like endings, with trumpets and new policies. There is only the bowl and the board and the knife and the soft arithmetic of 4 and 6. There is the careful sweep and the cloth that carries what it must carry, and the iron that taps like a stamp on a letter. There is ash that receives, and earth that keeps, and smoke that convinces doubt to smell mice. There is a door that chooses to be quiet, and a lamp that learns how to leave a room without feeling missed. If you're still awake, you can make a mental note to return for the next audit. If you've already wandered into that part of the night where thoughts nap with, one eye open your place is here saved among the simple tools. Far away, something that might have been a hull counts its would-be planks and finds it is always, gratefully, a few short. The wind rehearses hush again and again until even the word hush is tired of itself. The sea, pleased with a day of very little progress, signs the ledger with a smile no one can hear. You might not think a sea has a housekeeping list, but Giger does, and he keeps it folded in the foam like a note to himself. Light the hearth beneath the great kettle. Tidy the benches, count the cups that refill themselves without being asked, and keep the yeast undisturbed, which is really the same as asking a beach not to eavesdrop. His hall under the waves doesn't look like a palace so much as a patient workshop. Long tables, ropes drying like old smiles, shelves of shells labeled in tiny slanted runes, a warm square of stones where the fire lives and pretends it has never met water. The kettle is ridiculous in a gentle way, wide as a courtyard and somehow still homely. It remembers Hymir's grumbling and Thor's boat trip, and has decided to respond by steaming quietly and being useful. Jir moves through the hall with the slow cheer of a baker up before dawn. He runs a thumb along the edge of a ladle the size of a shield, checks the scent of salt and barley and something sweet that refuses to give its name, and nods without hurry. If you're still awake in a little while, you might subscribe to the way he stirs one circle for memory, one for kindness, one for luck, or don't. The kettle will keep counting without us and be very polite about it. The benches are not in a hurry either. They have learned to sit in long lines, like whales pretending to be furniture, and they get dusted with a handful of clean sand that makes them shine without sparkling. The floor is swept with a brush bound from seagrass. It collects crumbed salt, a few careless pearls that rolled underfoot during last winter's talk about ice, and 3 stray fish scales that reflect the fire so beautifully no one feels like scolding them. Jir keeps a stack of linen towels folded near the fire, and each towel is stitched with a little wave, so he will not forget to return them to Ran when she asks where the good towels went. She is gone with the Neds now. She prefers evening errands. The way some people prefer late grocery stores, and the 9 daughters of the couple are somewhere between chores, sometimes setting out cups, sometimes surfacing to watch gulls pretend to be philosophers. The girls have names like moods of water and tend to be exactly what their names suggest. None of them ever rushes, because rushing does not make a good wave, and the sea has practiced being itself for a long time. Before the guests arrive, Jir checks the ledger that hangs from a peg. The pages are waterproof because they are made from decisions rather than paper. He keeps entries simple. Today, a brew for moderate laughter, steady conversation, and no challenges, which means the foam should stay low and the refilling cups should know how to pretend they weren't trying. He writes one more line, the kind that looks like a joke and behaves like an instruction. If Loki appears, seat him between patients and a story about weather. The ladle goes in, the circle is made, and the surface of the drink smiles back. This is where the brew gets its calm from. It is stirred not just around, but inward, like trimming nail parings into a bowl by a hearth. Though no one mentions that in Jir's kitchen because the sea dislikes complicated metaphors before breakfast. Yeast needs quiet, which is an odd thing to ask underwater, but Jir has a way of making it so. He taps the rim of the kettle with a knuckle, and sound folds in on itself. The way a blanket behaves when a cat chooses the center. Barley steeped in warm water releases. Stories of summer fields and short rainstorms, and the one rabbit whose opinion of farmers was nuanced. A pinch of juniper nests behind the barley, because even giants recognize that some evenings need a green note to finish a sentence, and a clutch of sea salt dissolves with the uncomplaining grace of experienced diplomacy. Jir considers honey, but honey makes everyone confess their best idea too quickly. And this is an evening for slow thinking, not bright plans. He leans over the steam and tastes the air with his eyes shut, and for a moment the hall hears only breath. Like a tide practicing being trustworthy, cups are counted. Some think Jir's cups are magic because they refill themselves as soon as a guest looks away. Jir says the trick is smaller than that. Cups remember who they are sitting with. They prefer good listeners and settle almost empty beside people who talk like hail. And beside people who talk like the inside of an oar, they go on strike until the sentence forgets itself. Each cup has a slight dent, not from battles, but from being brave enough to fall asleep on its side. Jir checks the count 20 beneath the shelf, 10 on the board, a handful for the late arrivals who swear they were on time in other time zones, and wipes the rims with a cloth dipped in warm foam. He sorts the cups by temperament. The eager ones to the left, the shy ones to the right, the stoic ones in the middle where they can learn to speed up or slow down as needed. He keeps one special cup aside for Odin, not because Odin requires it, but because this one has a habit of staring into its own. surface until it sees the shape of a thought, and the old wanderer likes that sort of company. He walks the hall and opens the door that isn't a door so much as a polite reduction in wall. Through it comes a rehearsal of laughter, the kind that knows how not to echo. He has set the benches a little farther apart tonight, because sometimes people forget how much room a story requires to breathe. And the room will be better at remembering if it looks as though it was built with space in mind. The fire pops in the sort of accent a log uses when it claims ancestry in the north. Jir nods to it as to a coworker whose email response times are legendary. A line of spoons hangs from a beam, each carved from driftwood that once believed itself a poet. The spoons are numbered because Rand collects them without meaning to, and this way the hall can tell which ones have joined her net and which ones are still pretending to be tools. When guests arrive, they do not tumble in. They arrive the way fog arrives at a fjord, knowing where the furniture is without bragging about it. Odin, who has mastered walking without making announcements, lets his cloak drip into a basin shaped like a seal's smile. He is followed by Frigg, who examines the towels and sends one a glance that says, "You belong in the good drawer," and by a few attentive skalds, whose verses have been steeped in weather and now taste like something people trust. Thor shows up later with a polite bruise from wrestling a cloud that claimed to be essential infrastructure. He sets Mjolnir against a chair in a firm domestic lean, as if the hammer has chores after supper. Nobody fights. Not because they cannot, but because Jir's hall trains everyone the way a quiet train. Station trains a crowd by being exactly the right size and offering them a destination. Made of talking softly, the brew hums to itself. Jir dips the ladle and pours. Cups remember their listeners. Benches remember how to keep the back straight without punishment. The lanterns adjust themselves to a height that forgives complexions. The daughters move between table and kettle and door with wave logic, curving when a corner asks, slowing when a story needs to finish its own sentence. They never spell. The sea is the best teacher of balance when the floor is moving, even if the floor in the hall is not. Occasionally, one of them pauses by the door that is not a door and listens to the surf giving the rocks gentle advice. With flat, calm looks and curving hands, they keep the rhythm that Jir taught them. Pour, listen, lean nearer to laugh quietly, pour again. A guest reaches for a second cup and finds it was already there, waiting politely as conversations meander. Jir notices where attention is thin and generosity thick. He makes small adjustments, the way a shepherd might, acknowledging how groups form naturally around topics like weather that remembers names, or boats that pretend to be hungry, or that time the moon hid and everyone insisted they could still see just fine. He thinks of the kettle as a tide within the hall. He turns the heat down by barely a thought, and the foam sets lower, which encourages small stories to grow taller and big stories to stoop enough to be understood. Outside, a current brushes the hall like a friendly cat and moves on. Jikir makes a note to thank it later with 2 cups poured off the good side, because the brew is strong but sleepy. Everyone remembers manners they didn't know they owned. When Loki's shape appears in the doorway, some evenings a slim line, other evenings a question mark with boots, the daughters direct him to a bench flanked by Patience on one side and Weather on the other. Patience speaks in paragraphs without conclusions. Weather nods frequently and only promises clouds that are already present. Loki sighs, which causes a tiny private breeze. He looks into his cup expecting mischief and discovers merely flavor, which is much harder to argue with. For the next hour, he collaborates with everyone on the extremely low-stakes project of ranking types of seaweed by how much they resemble ordinary human mistakes. People disagree kindly and then apologize for enjoying disagreement. No growls, no foaming speeches, no cups flung into careers as missiles. Jir is pleased. He offers a dish of salt-baked minnows which have never been fish and never will be. and the platter returns empty and yet somehow still full. The way a good joke grows when you share it with the right companions. The etiquette of cups continues by itself. A skald who tried to memorize the refilling trick fell asleep during his own observation and woke to find the cup had rolled a finger width away. Embarrassed for them both, Odin's special cup shows him a thought that looks like a path through ordinary grass. He smiles as if obvious things are benevolent gods and practices forgetting his smile until it can't be blamed on him. Frigg sets a towel deliberately over the back of a chair so it will feel respected and will not go to Rand's net out of pique. Thor absent-mindedly uses Mjolnir's handle as a spoon rest and then apologizes to the hammer, which acts as though this happens in every household dot in the middle of all this domesticated tide. Jir does little maintenance miracles. He shoos a draft toward the hearth by telling it a story about a cliff that expected applause. Drafts are vain, and they go where there is performance lighting. He turns a bench an inch so two old friends can keep pretending they aren't already facing each other. He moves a bowl of roasted kelp to where the room stops wishing for it and begins to reach. He sends one daughter to the door with a bucket to listen for the kind of weather darkness makes when it is bored. She reports that it is humming softly, which is the same as being good. These are the acts a host does when the sea has asked him to keep the land portion simple. When the breath of the hall deepens, Rand returns with her net. The net mutters a little. Nets always do, listing the day's receipts in an undertone. One brass button that planned to be necessary. An apology someone dropped on a pier. A spoon that swore it belonged to this hall, but did not show proper identification. Jir kisses his wife's cheek, which is salt and light, and trades her the net's complaint for a folded towel from the good stack, which makes the net feel valued and therefore less inclined to collect spoons by accident. Rand sits and counts with 2 fingers on the table, pretending she's not counting, and the brew nods to her by making the foam lower at her cup, as if it knows secrets should not wear hats. Eventually, a calm arrives so complete it stops acting like a mood and starts acting like furniture. Jir notices when words begin to repeat pleasantly, not as an argument, but as an echo finding a favorite wall. He dims the lanterns in a way that registers as a suggestion rather than a rule and taps the kettle rim so the yeast will go to bed first. Leaders should model the behavior, even if they are yeast. One by one, people lean back and practice looking at nothing. Thor, who is a sincere man and therefore a tremendous sleeper, closes his eyes with the professional quiet of a blacksmith letting iron cool. Odin's cup shows him a path like a thread through cloth, and he hums an agreement and leaves the sentence unfinished. The daughters breathe in slow synchrony like small tides, working out the math of shores. The best part of the evening is the cleanup that feels like a continuation of talking. Jir never scolds the crumbs. He thanks them for their attendance and helps them into a broad pan that leads to the hearth. He wipes the long table with a cloth that smells of juniper and warm steam. The cloth sighs like a window that has just been opened. Cups go to their shelf and practice being still, which is harder than refilling, yet they perform it with a monkish pride. The spoons are counted. Numbers line up well. None missing tonight, none that want to become jewelry, none that remember a previous life as a plank and try to sleep in the lumber pile. Jir writes a note in the ledger one line that says calm achieved, refills timely. Loki stayed between patience and weather and adds a small drawing of a wave smiling in a tired way. A signature almost too quiet to notice. Outside, the sea folds and unfolds itself with the focus of someone performing slow origami no one will ever see. Jir opens the door that is not a door and sets the bucket outside to taste the night. The bucket brings back a report of coolness with a low moon and a promise that tomorrow will be given, though it declines to mark a time. Rand sets her net across 2 pegs, so it will dream without catching dreams that do not belong to it. The daughters lay towels near the hearth to dry and whisper verdicts on the evening. The best conversation was about cloud shadows. The most efficient yawn belonged to a raven. The good bench deserves a compliment. Jir tells them the bench knows. Benches listen with their backs. When the guests drift out, they do it like kelp in a current, aligned without being organized. Odin leaves last, as if he has to sit until his cup stops trying to show him metaphors he already owns. He thanks Jir in the way of a man who always thanks hosts. There is weight in it and the relief of a ritual that works. Thor carries Mjolnir like a folded blanket and remembers halfway to the door to return the towel he borrowed for his cloak. Frigg rearranges one spoon on her way out so it will not consider running away. Loki pauses, almost off-duty now, and touches the rim of the kettle respectfully, as if congratulating it on being stubborn in the right direction. Then he resists turning into a fish and goes home as a person, which is a victory no cup will brag about, but will certainly remember. The fire learns how to be small. It goes from paragraph to sentence to punctuation and finally to a comma, ready to continue in the morning. Giger scrapes the last soft layer from the kettle's sides and feeds it to the heat. You never leave sweetness lying around in a hall where stories could pick it up and sprint. He covers the mouth of the kettle with a board that used to be a door and now prefers to be a lid. Objects retire from their original jobs at their own pace. The brushes are hung. The floor is swept inward, not because monsters are expected, but because inward always brings sleep closer. Jir looks around the hall and sees nothing dramatic anywhere, which is his preferred decor style. Before bed, there is a small ceremony, mostly because small ceremonies keep the sea from attempting large ones without supervision. Jir stands with Ran and the daughters around the kettle and says the hospitality, oath that works even when no one hears it. Let the heat stay friendly. Let the foam remember the low road. Let the cups refill only for gentle purposes. Let spillages confess themselves and join the cleaning without fuss. The words make the hall look briefly more itself, as though you see two versions at once, one in bright hours and one in sleep. They untie the silk cord on the door that is not a door. Not to open it, but to let it know it could be opened if the night needed a way out of obligations. Then they go to their rooms, which are really closets with contentment in them, and leave the hall to the steady companionship of the hearth dot. Sometimes the sea hums, a song it learned from ships that forgot to brag. Sometimes it recounts, in a voice like old rope, the names of stones that once held coastlines together. Tonight it says nothing. The hall breathes. Foam rests. The ledger dries in the warm air, its letters curling a little like drowsy fishtails. If you're still awake, you can let your own breath match the kettle's 3 circles memory. Kindness, luck, and if you are already far away, you can drift further without changing anything. Jir will be up before the sun, practicing patience with barley. Ran will roll her net carefully so it does not recruit spoons. The daughters will wake in waves and set out cups that remember who sits beside them. By daylight or lantern, tomorrow will look like this again. A good floor, a huge kettle with excellent intentions, and a host moving slowly and certainly from ladle to bench to ledger, adjusting the world by quiet inches until conversation tastes like warm foam. Far out, where wind rehearses its hushes, the sea smooths a line in the dark and makes it finer, then finer again, until it forgets it was ever a line at all and becomes only water practicing sleep. You might not expect a ship to be built out of forgetfulness, yet the old stories say Naglfar waits for that very thing, the slivers people meant to tidy later. The clippings kept just for a moment, the careful little trims that never met a fire. It sounds like a riddle whispered by a fussy grandmother. Keep your nails short or a boat will come for you. Still, around low hearths and winter lamps, the rules settled in like a stool you forget isn't part of the floor. Every house had a bowl. Clay if the family trusted earth. What if they liked how warmth darkened the grain? The bull's job was simple and faintly funny: catch what the night would steal. The bull sat near the fire because a warm mouth remembers to close. A small knife kept it company, oil-soft handle, blade tidy as a bookmark. Not a weapon, more of a reminder. Nails were trimmed inward, not outward, because the door should never learn a path. When clippings landed, they made a dry sound like seeds. Someone always counted, not to reach a number, just to say aloud to the room, "These belong to no ship." The quiet arithmetic felt good, like picking lint from a sweater and promising the sweater it will be worn again tomorrow. By the way, if you're still awake in a few minutes, you could follow this channel so I come back to remind you to burn your metaphorical nail clippings. Or skip it and pretend you already did. Naglfar is famously patient. No one announced the second part of the rule. You could write it on a beam if you wished, but the beam would blush. Every loose sliver is a plank for a ship that should not sail. People phrased it kinder. They said the sea keeps careful books. They said wood listens. They said the dead appreciate houses with tidy floors. If you do nothing, the sea remembers. That was the phrase that stuck. It made children glance at the water as if the tide were carrying an abacus made of shells. The bowl by the hearth did not feel heroic. It felt domestic, like warm socks, like a chair that creaks in a polite accent, because the carpenter lived nearby. Sometimes, when the wind grew opinionated and old doors played their one-note song, someone would turn the knife so the blade slept under its own shadow. That was all. A small movement. A promise folded into wood-night chores began when the day had already finished explaining itself. You sweep the floor inward, threshold brushed with birch, because birch gives clean advice. The brush talks the crumbs toward the fire and forgets their names on purpose. The bowl waits with the patience of pottery. Clippings, comb fall, stray threads. Everything that might wish to be a road is lifted with a dry cloth, not a bare palm. A pinch of salt joins the bundle, and the iron tongs touch it once to make it honest. Breath turns into a metronome. Inhale 4, exhale 6, until hands and mind keep the same tempo. The work is mostly habits stacked like quiet plates. You can do it with your eyes half closed and still put things where the house wants them to go. People used to say that if you listened closely, you could hear the sea take one step back each time a package of nail pairings met warm ash. The sound was probably just fire remembering where to look, but it felt like progress. Small things needed changing before they could stop pretending to be important. The bowl tips, and the fire speaks. Into ash. Into the kind of smoke that tells old stories to the rafters. Into earth, perhaps, if the family keeps a shallow grave beneath a flat stone outside the door. 3 knots in a cord to seal the rest. A spoon of embers, a sprig of juniper for the memory to smell good while it forgets. If you give the moment a shape, the ship in the far-off dark cannot claim it. Wood starves in the dark when people do their chores. There is a sweet humor in that. Not victory, just a harmless triumph of diligence. Children like to watch the salt waver blue at the edge of flame, the way a letter's flourish lives at the end of the line. They would ask if Naglfar could tell the difference between one household's ash and another's. Grown-ups answered yes, because children respect work more when someone's keeping score. The gatekeepers in these stories are not dragons. They are cowls. They are cords. They are hands that know how to stop where kindness says stop. When a body must be washed, nails are trimmed short, neat, contained, untempting. Not because the dead are suspicious, more because the living hope to be boring in all the right ways. Cuttings are wrapped in linen, knotted thrice, and laid with salt to cool the meaning. The knife moves toward the heart, never away, so no path is open to wander. Words stay small, thanks, rest, go easy. Never orders, never bargains, If you ask the hearth for omens, it answers only with warmth, which is both reasonable and a little smug. Requests must be reversible and kind fit for a single market day, not a lifetime's debt. So if fear runs hot, it is written smaller and set aside until the moon thins. A good boundary is not a fence. It is a schedule: start time, end time, closure. No lingering threads to snag the door when the wind wants to rehearse. There is also the limit that keeps courage from becoming performance. The living do not haggle with silence. You can ask a beam to hold its tongue, and it will. You can ask a towel to be honest about being a towel, but you cannot ask the night to applaud you for your housekeeping. People learn to do the ordinary well and then stop. They discover that nails trimmed with the same calm as bread sliced for supper do not invite stories to behave like alarms. If someone, usually a cousin with too many opinions, wanted to add speeches, the room offered them a broom instead. It's remarkable how often eloquence finds it has the time to sweep. Morning makes a gentle audit. At first light, sweep lines are checked. The bowl is empty. The knife is dry. Someone notes the small facts in a book that looks suspiciously like a recipe: date, bundle, breath count, number of times the cat attempted to assist. Short records resist large fear. If wind has shifted the ash, it is pressed flat again. The house learns a steadier habit. The door is tested once. It agrees to be quiet. There's a tiny pleasure in tapping each latch and hearing it say present. On mornings when the sea is in the mood to hum, people stand at the threshold and listen, nothing to solve, just inventory. You will be glad to hear that even gods respect a list. Odin liked lists so much he carried one in each eye. Or so the poets whispered, smiling in their sleeves. After the little audit comes the smaller oath. At the threshold, nothing loose to the night, nothing sharp to the road. Iron rests on iron. The blade sleeps. The bowl returns to its place. The fire receives one last careful stir, as if tucking in a child who insists they are awake. Rest is asked to go first because sleep cools meaning and keeps hands gentle. The oath is not ceremony in the way that storybooks like ceremony. It is closer to a habit wearing its best sweater. The words fit in the mouth like warm bread. Somewhere far off, a patient keel finds no new planks. The sea waits without offense. The ship does not sail. This is not triumph. It is simply an absence of drama maintained by attention, like a garden path that never grows grand enough to invite a parade. People sometimes wondered if the whole idea, this quiet war with a boat made from what we don't want to keep, began as a joke. You can imagine the old storyteller sipping something on us saying, "All right then, tidy the house or the dead will come back for overdue lumber," and everyone laughing so well the laughter turned practical. But the story endured because it gave shape to a soft human wish. May small chores matter more than large terrors. May the world be held together by bowls, brushes, salt, and the warm authority of a fire that likes you. The myth took responsibility and made it a comfort. The tax that no one said aloud became less about fear and more about membership. The way a village asks you to pass the water pail after you drink dot in that spirit, the night chores grew considerate. A person might save snippings until a moon slice might, because thin moons are good at forgetting. Another might fold ash into the garden bed where cabbages practice quiet ambition. Someone else would take the linen packet to the shore and hide it under a flat. Friendly stone, not ends tucked as if the tide had taught them manners. The exact method mattered less than the tone. Do it the way you make tea for a friend who likes to linger, even when they pretend not to. The sea liked and still likes this kind of tone. It resembles weather that knows when to leave. Light jokes helped. If a nail flew against the board and bounced once, someone would whisper, 1 plank minus 1, and children would nod gravely, like a committee that just approved a bridge. People told each other that Ran with the net does not trouble houses that keep their bowls in order because she respects organization. They warned that Loki would absolutely build a raft from a single carelessly placed sliver just to prove a point, then lose interest halfway across the bay and wander off to critique the sunset. None of these comments were exactly theology. They were more like seasoning. They made the work taste the way you want a long evening to taste tidy, faintly salted, a little amused at itself. There were even traveling customs for guests. When you stayed in someone's longhouse, you were expected to add to the bowl. Not your whole history, just the day's edge. A chip of something sharp turned harmless. A lost thread trimmed short so it wouldn't lead you into tomorrow like a dog that knows a shortcut through brambles. Hosts made room for these contributions the way they made room for cloaks and stories. The bowl grew a temporary hunger and was satisfied. The fire accepted the extra mouthful with gentle surprise, as if the universe had remembered to send dessert dot inside all of this move the practical music of hands. Iron tongs clicked once like a small decision. Salt poured in a thread rather than a pile. Birch swept inward, never outward, and learned all the corners so mice couldn't map the room with confidence. Doors were rubbed with a bit of tar or fat against squeak, because squeaks like to pretend they are the beginning of trouble. Windows rasped their frosted breath and were given a cloth name to keep. These tasks taught people what time looked like on the ground. Not calendar time. Household time. The kind that notices how embers prefer to sit in a triangle, or how water takes the shape of banks when it meets wooden bowls. If someone forgot if a long day elbowed a small practice off the table, the correction was simple. Add it to tomorrow, smaller and kinder. This is the sort of forgiveness ordinary work amasses. It doesn't need speeches. It doesn't ask you to feel differently. It just urges your hands to keep the promise your mind would like to make. The sea notices and records without drama. That is one of its better habits. The ledger is the weather. You cannot see the ink, but you can usually feel the grade of the page. Toward the end of a winter night, when houses grow quieter than sleep and even the rafters stop rehearsing their lines, the last ember moment arrives. Someone who ever has a talent for endings that don't end checks the bowl. Emptiness is a good weight. They nudge the ash, its eyes. The small blue halos along the edge bow out. A tiny breath count seals it in, 4 and 6 out. Around the room, objects sit like well-behaved sentences after a long paragraph. The lamp lowers its own voice. The knife goes face down and forgets it is a blade. Even the broom tilts itself so its bristles won't dream of standing guard. And if the sea is listening, which it always is in some mild, but keeping way, it hears only ordinary kindness carried to completion. It hears a plank not becoming. It hears a ship deciding nothing. In the far dark, Naglfar remains a rumor under a tarpaulin of sleep, waiting on a harbor made of unkept promises that never quite reach quota. This is the soft joke of the myth. The apocalypse can't find Perking because the villagers sweep the threshold. So let your breath practice the small oath now. Nothing loose to the night. Nothing sharp to the road. Keep what's needed. Burn what's not. Count if it calms you. Forget if forgetting helps. If you're still with me, you could save this story the way we save clippings, fold it into the warm ash of your thoughts, and let it become part of the house. If you've drifted away, that's better. The bowl is empty. The knife is dry. The door knows where to rest. Somewhere beyond the fjord, a patient ship checks its inventory and finds it politely missing. The water writes a quiet line across itself, then another, until even counting becomes sleep. You don't expect a ship to be built out of the smallest things you meant to throw away. Yet the old rooms say it with a straight face. Every nail sliver you forget becomes a plank for a boat you'll never want to meet. The claim is so neatly absurd that it sticks like a seed in wool. People in the longhouses did not argue with it. They simply adopted a house rule that sounded more like a whisper than a law. A bowl by the hearth, a small knife with an oiled handle that remembered everyone's hands, and a promise that clippings would fall inward, never outward, so no road would be cut through the door. When the lamp sat low and the rafters softened from smoke, the bowl looked like a second, quieter moon. Tiny pairings landed with the sound of dry snowflakes. Someone always counted, not to reach any particular number, but to persuade the room that all shavings were present and accounted for. The sea keeps books, people said, and the sea's auditor is patient. It felt comforting, as if the tide itself were an elderly clerk who approves of tidy ledgers. If you're still awake after a few breaths, you can subscribe gently, without telling the sea, so this clerk returns tomorrow with the same soft stamp of approval. Or don't subscribe and imagine that you did. In these sagas, intention is usually measured by how warm your hands stay. The house rule never needed trumpets. It lived in the simple choreography of evenings. A child brought the bowl closer to the fire and warmed it so memory would move faster. The knife lay sleeping with its edge toward the heart of the room, because the heart was where edges learned their manners. Nails were trimmed short and modest, more like commas than daggers, each one turned inward as if choosing to stay for supper. A small bit of salt waited in a horn spoon. A square of linen lay folded into a friendly geometry. If someone asked why a ship should care about these details, the elders said the ship was built out of neglect, not wood. It made sense in the way slow things make sense. You feel it more clearly than you can explain it. Every family had a saying: burn it, bury it, or bind it. Some families added a fourth option, boast about nothing, which is a very Norse solution to nearly everything. At night, the chores walked themselves, almost embarrassed to be called chores. The floor was brushed inward with birch switches because birch is known to tell the truth without being cruel. The threshold received extra attention, as if the door were a shy guest. Loose threads from cloaks, the small teeth of a broken comb, a bead that had lost its friend. Each item was invited into the bowl with the same politeness given to more obvious dangers. Hands moved in a rhythm you could borrow for breathing, in for 4, out for 6. The fire listened the way an older cousin listens, pretending not to, nodding at all the good parts. Iron tongs tapped once upon the hearthstone to wake luck and twice to tell it to sit. If salt joined the parcel, it joined with a dignified pinch, never a scold. These were actions so small that the mind felt free to drift. You could think of the day's weather, or whether the cow with the winning expression would favor the south field. Still, the body remembered to gather and to seal. Muscle is the best archivist of vows. The bundle changed its nature in one of 3 directions, and everyone had an opinion about which was best. Into ash, the bowl tipped, the embers opened a red eye, and the clippings made a faint leaf sound as they forgot their shapes. Into earth, a shallow grave under a flat stone by the step, where rain could read the inscription of dirt and carry the story downward. Into smoke, a little juniper, a breath of heat, and the thinnest filament of gray rising to teach the rafters a new sentence. Whichever path you chose, you counted quietly. Not to guarantee magic grows suspicious when counted, but to give your thoughts the steady floor of numbers. Children like to ask whether a single sliver set adrift might find Naglfar all by itself. Grown-ups answered with extreme seriousness that slivers don't travel alone. They bring gossip, and gossip is heavy. So best to discourage any journeys at the start. There were rules you only learned by doing them. The bowl should never be empty for long, because emptiness likes to audition for drama. The knife should be wiped with linen and then with a gesture, the second cloth being mostly air. The door should be coaxed closed, not dismissed. And nobody, under any weather, spoke to the fire as if it were an oracle. The hearth answers only with warmth. That was the limit, and it was kind. It spared people from performing the night. The more practical a custom becomes, the less likely it is to call for applause. So if someone tried to enlarge the moment with omens, neighbors handed them the broom stage. Crew instead of actor and life returned to its correct size. Even the dead received this measured courtesy. When a household prepared a body for its long sleep, the nails were trimmed short-contained, untempting, as if saying, "We won't make you a road." Cuttings were wrapped in linen and knotted 3 times because 3 is an honest number. You can't trip over it by accident. The knife moved toward the heart, never away, so paths would lead inward to rest rather than outward to wandering. Salt cold meaning such a delicate phrase, and everyone understood it. Even the children who thought salt only belonged to porridge or tears. Words remained small. Rest well. Go easy. No bargains. The living had learned not to negotiate with quiet. Quiet always wins, and it appreciates not being forced to prove it. Guests were folded into the rule with the same hospitality given to cloaks and dogs. If you slept by someone else's fire, you contributed to their bowl. A day's edge, that's all. The little piece you could spare from the story without changing the plot. Hosts kept an extra spoon for these offerings. Some carved a notch into the bowl's rim and said it was the guest notch, though no one could explain why that made the fire burn straighter. Being included felt like being forgiven for a mistake you hadn't made yet. In a world with wolves, frost, and the occasional god who wants to turn into an animal for a lesson, small forgivenesses add up to something like a second rooftop morning audited without judgment. At first light, children walked the sweep lines like tiny accountants. The bowl was emptied, the knife was dry, the ash lay pressed flat with a wooden paddle that doubled as authority. Someone wrote a note, wind from southeast, breath count 4 to 6, 2 pairings from Ulf's thumb, 1 from the ant who laughs like a kettle. The record had no legal force, but fear respects paper. If the door had shifted, it was persuaded back into the posture of a citizen. You test a door with the back of your hand. That is the old way. Your palm puts too much argument into the test. If the house sighed, people pretended not to hear. Houses like to accompany themselves. A little oath came after the lists, not grander than a lullaby. Nothing loose to the night. Nothing sharp to the road. The words were said at the threshold, because thresholds understand both sides without choosing. Iron rested on iron, the blade asleep under its own shade. The bowl returned to its post like a guard whose watch is also a nap. Someone told the fire it had done enough, and the fire, almost flattered, learned to be still. This oath was not a wall against the world. It was more like a mitten for the world's hands, the kind that keeps even the clumsiest fingers gentle dot from here. The story drifts outward like steam from a wooden cup. People asked where Naglfar waits when not being built, and the answer changed depending on who was doing the asking. Some said the ship sleeps beneath a sheet of slow tide far beyond the skerries, weighing each sliver in its invisible scales. Others said the ship waits on the horizon of moments. Not distances there whenever someone forgets to finish a small kindness. A few insisted the ship is a myth invented by tidy people to give their sweeping a dramatic backstory. The skeptics still used a bowl. You do not need to believe in the auditor to enjoy a clean ledger. Soft jokes found their place like sand under a picnic blanket. If a clipping bounced and tried to run, someone announced, "One vote in favor of staying." If a guest dropped a sliver on the wrong side of the line, another person would sigh with manufactured tragedy and say, "Ah yes, a plank for the port side, which needs none." No one laughed loudly. They smiled into their sleeves. Even Loki, were he listening, would be thwarted by the atmosphere. Too much kindness for mischief to find an angle. He might tidy the bowl just to see whether anyone noticed. Someone would thank him. That usually ended the experiment dot as the year walked its circle. The custom adapted like moss to shade. In summer, bowls went outdoors in the evening so late light could supervise. In autumn, packages meant for burial were tucked beneath, stones warmed by yesterday's sun so they would not feel the shock of the first cold rain. Winter made the knife a kind of meteor. Every spark from the hearth's iron kiss rode to ground like a tiny falling star whose wish was already granted. Spring collected all these habits and pressed them like flowers into the new grass. You could trace a family's temperament by their method. Some preferred ash because it is decisive. Some preferred earth because it is patient. Some loved smoke because it leaves the room scented like a good memory. The ship, hungry for neglect, learned to go elsewhere. Every once in a while, a visitor attempted efficiency in the modern style, by which I mean they proposed doing everything at once and forever. Someone would say, "Let us make a great bonfire and commit all the slivers of the month to it," with speeches and trumpets and an ambitious stew. The village listened and nodded. Then an aunt observed that ambition adds splinters faster than it removes them. The bowl went back to the hearth. The stew still happened, of course. A pot never refuses to be condensed. At the very edge of the night, when the rafter dust hangs in the air like a constellation that never learned its own myth, the household folded into sleep. You could hear the sea practice forgetting. You could hear the bowl practice being empty. You could hear the door practicing its quiet click, the kind that tells the world you are home without bragging. A person thought about nothing in particular, which turned out to be the exact prayer the sea understands. Somewhere beyond the fjord, a not quite ship practiced not quite moving. It is hard work to remain hypothetical. Naglfar managed it with a professionalism that should be applauded, though we will applaud later, softly, after a nap. Asterisk, asterisk. And if the night asked for a story, the house had one. A role so small that it made life larger, a set of gestures that could be done with half-closed eyes and still count as devotion. The custom did not promise safety, it promised companionship with the hours. The sea only wanted to be sure you were paying attention. When you did, it looked away, satisfied, the way a cat looks away right before lying on the warmest page. The fire dwindled to a single bead that pulsed like a heartbeat from far inside a shell. Breath found the count again, 4, then 6, patient and rounding off at the edges. The bowl rested, plain and honorable, waiting for whatever tomorrow would not need. The knife lay asleep, blade turned in, as if listening to the hush. The door rehearsed its one line and remembered it. On the horizon of moments, where neglect and rumor try to build something out of almost nothing, a quarter-plank dream ship took attendance and discovered so many absences that it lost interest and drifted into a long, useful pause. The ledger closed itself with a page weight of wind. The house continued, full of small, decent weather, and you, overhearing all of it, might let your eyes fold inward like trimmed lashes, satisfied that even the mists respect bowls and that bedtime, like the sea, keeps careful books it never bothers you to read. Asterisk, asterisk. You would not expect a ship to be built from what people snip away and forget, yet the old fireside rule says exactly that, very politely, as if it were offering you bread. Every sliver of nail that wanders becomes a plank for a boat you do not want to meet. It is an odd idea, and it arrives with a calm face, the way snow arrives on a roof. In long houses where the rafters knew everyone's height, a clay bowl waited beside the hearth. Its job was small and patient catch what the night would otherwise claim. A wooden board sat on someone's knees. A little knife remembered hands. The room slowed down until the smoke climbed in a straight line and the benches remembered how to be warm. If you remain awake long enough to hear the rest of this, you can subscribe with the same energy used to place a spoon back in the drawer quietly, correctly, with no sudden movements. Or you can let the thought of subscribing drift away, like a spark that knows the way home. The bowl will not judge, and neither will I. The rule is simple and slightly bossy without being rude. Trim inward, never outward. No path is to be cut through the doorway by sharp little moons that think they are road builders. Elders say the sea keeps careful accounts, and the auditor it sends has infinite patience and a very tidy ledger. Children imagine this auditor as a gray gull in spectacles, which is correct enough for bedtime. Each clipping lands like a seed from last summer's weed's light, deliberate, counted. Someone always counts, not to reach any special number, but because counting persuades the room that order has decided to stay for another cup of warmth. People talk about cattle, weather, a neighbor's unfamiliar hat. The bull listens. The knife taps once and sleeps on iron like a cat that has learned manners. After a time, the night becomes a set of gentle tasks that know the way even if your thoughts wander. The floor is brushed inward with birch, which tells the truth without being cruel. The threshold receives a kind of bow. Loose threads are lifted from cloaks by a dry cloth, not a bare palm. A stray bead is captured like a small star that forgot its place. A comb tooth that tried to escape is forgiven. Iron touches iron once to make the bundle honest. A pinch of salt joins the parcel, purely ceremonial, like a handshake you give to luck so it behaves. Breath is measured if anyone remembers. Inhale for 4, exhale for 6 long enough to make the hands unhurried. This is not a ceremony. It is the opposite of a ceremony, which is why it works. What happens next depends on temperament and weather. Some families give their parcels to ash. The bowl tips and the embers open a red eye. The slivers forget their old shapes with a sound like seeds in a dry pod. Other families prefer the earth, a shallow grave beneath a flat stone, tucked just beyond the step, where rain can read the grave like a slow page. 3 knots seal the meaning. Still others let smoke write the departure. A sprig of juniper, the lightest breath of heat, and a thin gray line that wanders along the rafters until the night edits it away. When their nature changes, the ship cannot claim them. Wood starves in the dark. The sea's accountant makes a small, disappointed note and moves on. Visitors are folded into this custom before they can decide whether it's unusual. If you sleep near another family's fire, you contribute to their bowl. It is a very small tax, payable in crescent moons. Hosts keep an extra spoon for guest clippings, and some carve a notch on the rim, which they insist is for travelers, though nobody knows why this makes the fire burn steadier. Perhaps the bull enjoys being reminded that strangers also believe in it. A person might joke that their sliver prefers the starboard side of a hypothetical boat, but the joke lands softly and breaks apart like foam. There is a tone to these rooms that dissolves mischief without scolding it. Even Loki, if he passed by in some borrowed shape, would be forced to behave like a helpful cousin for at least half an hour. Preparing the dead for their longer sleep turns the rule into a particular gentleness. Nails are trimmed short, contained, untempting. The little knife moves toward the heart and never away, so no path is opened where hungry roads like to begin. Cuttings are wrapped in linen and knotted thrice, because 3 is the number most likely to show up on time. A measure of salt cools the meaning. The body is laid out with a tidiness that is neither proud nor ashamed. Words stay small. Rest well, go easy, we will tidy your corner. A household that could choose between grand speeches and sober tasks always chose the tasks, and their nights were measurably quieter. This rule has boundaries, and the boundaries are friendly and firm. No omens are taken from the fire. If curiosity asks for a prophecy, the hearth replies with warmth and nothing else. Requests must be reversible and kind fit for a single market day, not a lifetime's debt. If a fear swells like bread left too near the coals, it is written smaller and set aside until the moon thins. People discover that fear is poor at reading when the font is modest. Nobody bargains with the dark. Nobody shouts at the ash. Boundaries do not look like fences. They look like start time, end time, closure. No lingering threats. The sea does not admire drama, but it respects punctuality. Morning audits everything without mockery. At first light, the sweep lines are checked. The bowl is empty. The knife is dry with a temper you can trust. Someone makes a note on a scrap of board. Date, wind, breath count, number of slivers, whose thumb contributed the brave one. This record is not law. It is comfort wearing a hat labeled reference. If wind has fussed the ash into hills, a flat paddle persuades it back into calm. Ash is malleable if spoken to with patience. The door is tested with the back of a hand. The door agrees to be quiet. The room smells like sleep that ended gracefully. Children announce modest victories, like one bead rescued or comb tooth tamed, and everyone nods as if the land itself has been squared by a carpenter's rule. A tiny oath concludes the audit, not more elaborate than a goodnight. Nothing loose to the night, nothing sharp to the road. The words are set at the threshold, the place that knows both weather reports. Iron rests on iron. The blade sleeps. The bull returns to its lonesome post like a guard whose uniform is humility. Someone speaks to the fire the way you speak to an old dog, enough kindness to be understood without waking ambition. This oath does not close the world outside. It simply asks the world to walk with softer shoes. The custom adapts as seasons spin their patient wheel. Summer sets the bowl near the doorway so the late light can assist with supervision. Autumn tucks parcels for earth under stones still warm from sun, so they will not startle at their first cold. Winter drops a star from the iron tongs every so often, and each spark proves that good behavior produces plenty of spectacle all by itself. In spring, the grass reads every footnote left by snowmold and decides none of it contradicts the bowl. You can tell a family's philosophical style by the destination they prefer: ash for decisiveness, earth for patience, smoke for memories that want to be smelled later. The sea, which is happy to wait a century for one careless moment, finds itself bored by villages who cannot be bothered to offer it timber. Sometimes a visitor suggests a clever improvement. Why not gather a month's worth of slivers and hold a public bonfire with speeches and a stew as large as a cow stream? Everyone nods because nodding is polite. Then an ant says that ambition adds shavings faster than it removes them. The bull stays where it is. The stew happens anyway. Pots are not moral philosophers. A few people sneak second helpings of stew, promising to pay interest in the currency of sweeping the threshold. Interest is paid, and the threshold glows with the smugness of a job done better than required. Children ask excellent questions at bedtimes when their hands have been trusted with important tasks. If a single sliver escapes, will it truly find the ship? Elders answer that slivers do not travel alone. They bring gossip, and gossip is heavy. What does Naglfar do when there are no slivers to collect? It practices being hypothetical, which is a demanding form of rest. Where does the ship wait? Far beyond the skerries, where the horizon keeps its spare lines? Or closer than your shoelace knot, on the edge between habit and neglect? The children accept all answers at once. This, too, is a Norse ability to keep 3 explanations in one pocket without arguing about lint. When the longhouse quiets, you can hear the sea practicing forgetfulness. The sea rehearses until it gets it right, and then it rehearses again because professional pride is a current that never sleeps. You can hear the door practice its soft click, the kind of sound that teaches snow to land politely. You can hear the bowl practice being empty, which is a skill. The knife rests, blade turned inward as if listening to a story it has heard 100 times and still loves. Even the rafters hum a quiet note that says, yes, this is how wood remembers not to creak. The air smells like juniper and agreement. Odd facts float through these rooms and settle like feathers on blankets. In some districts, the bowl is made from clay, tempered with ground mussel shells so it will not crack in sudden heat. In others, the knife has a name, always a short one, not, or quiet, or home because named things respond better when asked to behave. There's a story about a farm where the cow was so impeccable that even her hoof pairings were collected and politely escorted to the ash, which is probably a joke but is told with a straight face, so the cow remains a civic example. A man once swore that if he kept the bowl half full, Naglfar would sail only in circles. He was gently corrected. Circles are still movement. Another woman said the ship is allergic to housekeeping. That explanation enjoys a wide, approving audience. What people rarely mention, because it is obvious once you're warm, is that the rule makes time pass nicely. The brain, which likes to chew old arguments at midnight, is given something smaller and more nutritious. Keep the slivers, tip the ash, fold the knot, press the breath to a number. When your mind insists on making a map of tomorrow, the bowl is a polite distraction, a miniature coastline that requires no boat to visit. You go there and return without traveling, which is the ideal winter journey. There are jokes, but the jokes are drowsy. Someone will announce, one plank removed from port, after sweeping a crescent into the bowl with overly theatrical precision. Someone else will ask the fire whether it accepts bribes, then pay in a spoon of broth anyway. If a sliver lands outside the bowl, a child will rescue it with the solemnity of a clerk retrieving a crown. The adults watch without saying that this is how laws survive, not by thunder, but by the tiny pride of doing it right when no one is timing you. Thunder is for other stories. Here we count. Far off, the not-quite ship, hungry for neglect, takes attendance and keeps losing everyone's name. It tries to be patient and makes a very impressive horizon. But patience is fed by small defeats, and the villages supply those too generously for Naglfar's taste. The ship dozes and wakes and practices its shadow, which is difficult to do in darkness. It wonders if it is an allegory, which is exhausting. Meanwhile, the bowl sits like a second moon, and the knife sleeps like a very thin bear. The sea, unconvinced by drama, smooths its face and studies the pebble arithmetic of the shore. When people finally turn toward their blankets, they still carry the weight of the knife's handle in their palm, a memory heavier than it should be, like a pebble that insists it was once part of a mountain, which may be true. Breath continues to count without permission. In for 4, out for 6, rounding off at the edges where numbers turn to wool. The bull stands guard without posturing. The door, pleased with its rehearsal, promises to keep the house in one piece until morning. And the world outside, seeing that everything within has already practiced being quiet, decides to practice as well. Snow, if it arrives, will try to land like advice you did not ask for and discover that you needed. You might never learn whether the ship exists. This is not a test. The story does not require prosecution or defense. It requires a place for small things to go, and a rhythm that both engine and cradle can keep. You provide those, and the story will make itself useful by growing soft at the edges until even curiosity forgets to demand a verdict. Somewhere beyond the fjord, the ledger closes itself with the weight of wind. Somewhere within the house, the last spark remembers how to behave and becomes an ember with no agenda. And you, having contributed your tiny moons to the correct bowl, are free to drift the way. Smoke drifts when it knows the rafters personally upward, sideways nowhere in particular, until the room and the sea and the patient not ship agree to let the night finish its sentence without you.